Welcome aboard. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Danai Maraire. I'm the founder of the Black Marriage Movement. Created this page because I wanted to be the change I wanted to see in the world. Wanted to create a space where we could have conversations about all things love, sex, marriage, relationships, conflict resolution, attachment styles, early childhood education, everything. Anything that helps you guys to have better relationships, better marriages, better dating lives with your significant others. That's what we talk about here. It is an open environment, and so I do encourage you guys to share and to speak with us and to interact with us. I do have a guest here today, so I do ask that you be respectful. If you cannot be respectful, you will be escorted out. I do believe in blocking. I also ask that you please refrain from using profanity while you're on the platform. It just helps people to feel more comfortable and to share. And one of the things that I really do not like in the comments is if someone is sharing and you start judging what they're saying or shaming what they're saying, it shuts people down so that they don't feel like opening up and sharing. So please do not do that. Again, I will warn you and then I will escort you out because it takes away from everybody else's experience. Having said that, I am super happy to bring you guys Dr. Nicole LaPera, who is the holistic psychologist. Today we're going to be talking about trauma bonds. I just reposted her post on trauma bonds that was so fabulous that I wanted to get her on the platform to talk to you guys. So I'm bringing her in now. Hopefully we're not going to have any technical difficulties. Yay!
No difficulties.
As I say, no technical difficulties. I see it starting to do its thing. Can you hear me, Nicole?
I hear you perfect. How about you? Are you hearing me good?
No, I can't hear you. There you are. Can you hear me?
Can't. I hear you. Do you hear me? Are you hearing me?
Yeah, it's spotty.
A little
it's
delay?
A little bit spotty. Yeah, it's making me think, you know what? Just because I don't want to have issues for the whole thing. Oh, was that you or was that me?
I went away to make sure my internet was on, and it is as powerful as possible.
Exactly
okay.
Okay, give me just a sec. I'm going to check mine too. Just a sec. On 5G, so
Awesome.
We should be good.
We're good. You're hearing me better?
Hi! I can hear you wonderful. How are you today?
Awesome. Good. How are you? Thank you so much for having a chat with me.
No, I'm so grateful to have you. Please introduce yourself to my audience.
Absolutely. So my name is Dr. Nicole LaPera. You can call me Nicole. I am the holistic psychologist on Instagram, and I'm really looking forward to connect with you and your community today. Thank you.
Yes, me too. This is so exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this just a sec here, and we'll go with on trauma bonds and more. Here we go. And more. Yay. Okay. I know, because I knew everybody's going to come in and go, what's the topic?
Right.
Okay, so welcome aboard. For Nicole's followers who are joining us here, my name's Danai Maraire. Welcome. I'm with the Black Marriage Movement via Instagram. And for my followers, this is Dr. Nicole LaPera. As she said, the holistic psychologist. She's got a wonderful page. She gives wonderful advice. And I've been following her for a long time. I've reposted her quite a few times. And last week she posted something that was so insane that I was like, we have got to talk about this because I have 20,000 questions and I know not just I do, but I know that my followers will as well. And more importantly, I see so many different people. I work as a relationship coach and I have a relationship forum and I see so many different people in my community not understanding A, what a trauma bond is, B, what it looks like, you know, once you're an adult and you're acting because that's kind of, you know, the source of your behavior. And then C, how to actually help somebody who might be in a situation like this because what seems to happen is a lot of shame, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of judgment, which really isn't helping the person who finds themselves caught in a situation like this. So I know that's a lot, but let's start there. Let's start with what is a trauma bond?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to acknowledge, Danai, that I think part of the reason, or I know for my own story included, part of the reason we don't know what it is or that we're in them, as more of us are than aren't in adulthood, is because what we call it is normal. We just call it our relationships. We might know on some level that they're not fulfilling, or that we're not, as happy, or maybe some of us could even describe our relationships as negative,
Right.
but it's still our familiar, it's our normal. So I think that really speaks to why this concept speaks to so many of us, because it's such a universally lived experience, as is a lot of, I think, the stuff that you and I talk about. And why we resonate the way we do is because we're talking about things that we're all dealing with and struggling with. So what is a trauma bond? Essentially, a trauma bond is the dynamic that we reenact in our relationships. So say in our adult relationships, it's those kind of patterns of dynamics that we find ourselves in our relationships. Yes. That's what a trauma bond is. And why it's called a trauma bond in particular, or why I've called it that in particular, it's because the dynamics that we're enacting in our relationships are typically the dynamics that we first learned in our first relationships, meaning they're not always the healthiest models of relationships, which is why it has that moniker of trauma bond. So a lot of us are reenacting these dynamics, not feeling maybe fulfilled in our relationships, maybe finding ourselves in downright problematic relationships, but it's all we know. And we've carried that model into our adulthood. But for most of us, it began so early in time, typically around our first experiences with relationships when we're children, when we're little.
I totally agree with you, and I thank you for that explanation, just because, and you so beautifully said it. A couple of people are saying, what is the post? So I'm just gonna pop that up and show it for anybody who was wondering. This is what the post looks like. You can find it on my page. You can find it on Nicole's page. It's my second to last post, but it literally says trauma bonds explained. And she goes through a wonderful breakdown of it. I'm going to read a little bit of her caption, and then we'll talk a little bit about that, because I think it's important. She said, I spent a few hours creating this. It's important. I hope that it's helpful. Trauma bonds are so common that most of us aren't even aware of the dynamics. I want you to understand that trauma bonding makes us blind to red flags. This is why there's so much shame around falling into these types of relationships. We tell people to just leave, but why would a person leave a relationship that feels like home? Let's stop there. You talk about red flags. I love this. And you specifically say that if you have a trauma bond, that it makes you blind to red flags, which I think is really important to break down, because the first thing everyone talks about, and that's out there kind of just in the language and the atmosphere, is when if someone's showing up in a relationship with you and there are all these sort of dysfunctional or toxic or narcissistic or selfish or dysfunctional habits, usually everyone's going, well, you should see that in the dating process. You should see that when you're early on connecting. It shows up as red flags. But if you are blind to red flags because the red flags feel like home, they are completely connected to mommy, daddy, what they did in my village, what they did in my household, wherever you grew up, however you grew up, then it's not going to look like a red flag. It's going to look like something that just feels like familiar.
Yes. 100%. I mean, outside of even feeling attractive to us, it is going to give us that sense of that which we know. Aside from, so the reality about relationships. So first of all, us humans, we're interpersonal. We need the village, right? We need the connection, whether it's with one other human. The positive benefits of interpersonal connection outside of division of labor, from stress relief to oxytocin and all of the great chemicals that, really are connected with connection. We need that as humans, right? So I say that to say that, in the beginning of a newly developing relationship, there are actually chemicals that confuse us. So that aside, that happens no matter what. It's that kind of blind love state. And that's chemically induced. I just want everyone to understand that, because that whole honeymoon period where we're like, there's actually hormones and chemicals are operating against us. They're clouding our judgment. That's universal and that's real. I often talk, Danai, about the physiological changes. That's why I call myself holistic, because they matter. And when hormones are blinding us, that's real. So aside from that, which is universal,
Well,
what comes...
hold on, before you move on, because I want to move on, but I want to just make sure people understand that. What you're saying is when you're in the initial stages of connection with a new awesome being, that chemicals
Yeah.
are also driving your behavior,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. Yes. They're driving our behavior, and they're coloring our perceptions, which is why everything does look a bit of with rose-colored glasses, and we
Right.
don't really see. I mean, we're a bit delusional to put, and that's real. I mean, we are being clouded. Our conscious mind. So I'm going to contrast what I'm talking about now, the conscious mind, with what I always talk about, the subconscious mind.
Yes.
Because the subconscious mind is why we're so driven to these trauma bonds. But it actually clouds. So the oxytocin, all the chemicals that are released when we're connecting with another human, cloud our conscious mind. They actually render it not as logical. So that's real. So then what we progress to as we then evolve into a relationship, once those chemicals wear off, as they do, now we have a person in front of us. And now I can see that person a bit clearer. That doesn't mean, though, right, that I'm not going to find myself attracted to those familiar dynamics like we're talking about. What I'm going to find myself attracted to is actually just that. So here's where the subconscious comes in. Early on in life, I use the language of conditioning. And I'll talk a lot about our earliest conditioning. I mean, this might sound crazy, but we come to this planet, however you think we get here, as little tiny dependent humans. Our physical needs, our emotional needs, and our spiritual needs, we are completely dependent upon caregivers, whomever they might be, to help us meet those. We actually can't, right? So we come to this planet and we're taking in and we're learning how to be human. So all of this learning happens while we just so happen to be in a brainwave state that makes us complete like a sponge. We're receptive. I mean, think about a little baby with the eyes wide open, and they're taking in life. And here's where the interpersonal part comes in. Because we're interpersonal, because we're dependent, the first thing we find ourselves in is in some version of a relationship, a dependent relationship with someone else, some other human somewhere. Some of us, it's a family, it's one person, it's a whole extended family, it's a village, depending on where we're brought up, right? So now we enter into this dynamic exchange between a little baby and this other person. And in that dynamic exchange, we're setting down these patterns of how to relate in this two-person relationship, or how to be a human, or how to get our needs met. And we're learning all of this in our childhood. I go back to the computer analogy a lot, because I think, especially in this digital age, it's the one we understand most, right? So all of this learning that we've done in these core years of development from birth until age 7, 8, 9, 10, right? They're being stored as programs in our subconscious, which we're really happy that we have. Because if we had to wake up every day and remind ourselves how to human, we would completely be exhausted. We cannot do that. And in that program, right, is how to be in relationship that I learned when I was younger, right? So here's where the subconscious and the familiarity comes in. So say I'm someone who maybe has a relationship track record of not having the most positive relationships, right? And maybe I even told my friends, and my friends who love me want what's best for me. And they're like, okay, next time these are the 3 red flags. Next time you see those, run for the hills, right? I find myself in another relationship. All my chemicals wore off, and now I have a human in front of me, right? Maybe consciously I'm like, okay, those are those red flags. However, when this person behaves maybe just as all of those other relationships have behaved, or those dynamics come back into play, my subconscious is registering them. It's registering all of life, all of the time. And it's going to feel that is familiar. And what familiarity translates to in the subconscious is safety. So even if logically this relationship might actually end up with you being unsafe physically, because it's that pattern you've played out, it just knows it as familiar. So now you're the person going back to this possibly problematic relationship. This is where shame comes in. All your friends are watching you, right? They're objective. They have a different vantage point, right? They're seeing things differently than you are. You just think it's familiar. And now you feel shameful when that relationship, as maybe it will, end up in that same negative place. So that's the power of the subconscious, and that's what's driving the majority of our decisions, especially in our relationships. We are gravitating toward those earliest experiences that we're used to.
So if, for instance, to break this down kind of with like a practical example, if I am dating a guy, and if I was raised in my parents' household, and say my father was either an alcoholic or he beat my mother and I watched this as a child. And so now I'm dating as a young woman and I'm trying to find a mate and I'm out in the world and I find myself attracted to a guy who might, I don't know, push me a little, or he might be really jealous, but he's possessive. And so I think that the possessive thing turns me on. But then later on, it develops into him putting hands on me. And I'm reenacting this dynamic that I saw between my parents as a little one. What part of that is a trauma bond? Is that what you would kind of communicate as a trauma bond? And how do I become mindful about creating a new habit, creating a new pattern, and if that qualifies as a trauma bond in terms of the reason why that would be attractive or why that would turn me on and why I wouldn't see it the same way that somebody who doesn't have that history would see it? How do I break that? How do I make a new decision? And how do I become mindful? Because as you said, my friends are watching me going, is she crazy? You know what I mean? Like, and particularly if it's happened 2 or 3 times where I'm attracting this type of a person who might put hands on me, maybe progressively worse in different relationships. But yeah, now I find myself, I'm here in this situation. I am reenacting this. What do I do about it? How do I become mindful about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the path out of any of these conditioned patterns that we're living, in my opinion, is awareness. And so questions to ask, whether you're in your example, and I think that is often what happens. Also, I want to just share another quick example of my lived experience, because I think it can expand, those listening, I think a lot of times we do think of this in terms of the abusive relationship, but there's a lot of dynamics that I believe characterize a trauma bond that are equally, are just as unhelpful in many ways. So there's that. So the question I would ask, right, that little child who maybe did watch that abuse and the alcoholism in the home, right? What was it like for that child showing up in those relationships? What were the feelings that child had more consistently than not? Did it feel chaotic? Did it feel fearful? Is this a person who felt close to the caregiver? Was it a push-pull dynamic, right? When dad was or caregiver, whoever it was, I forget, was in a good mood, did I have this intense love? And then when they were in a bad mood, right? So now I'm attracted to extremes. So what I want to explore is how did I experience as a child my earliest relationships emotionally and also behaviorally? How did I show up? Because that's typically how I'm going to continue to show up in my other relationships. So it's about the dynamics and the caregivers around us, but it's also the question we want to explore within ourselves is, what did that mean for me? So I'll use another example using my illustration. I have a mother who's very emotionally withdrawn, very disassociated, little emotional warmth and connection between her and I. I also have a family climate as a whole that's very enmeshed dynamically, meaning when there's an emotion in the household, all family members feel it at once. Our emotion, du jour, if you will, daily emotion that we love to feel was chaos and stress, right? So 2 things I noticed in my pattern in my relationships. 1, I would pick partners that were emotionally distant in some way, because that created that same relationship that I knew in my mother. If you would have heard me talk, all I would have said I wanted is closeness and connection. So here is that right kind of contradiction I've set up for myself. I desperately want someone to connect with, but I'm picking people who make me feel comfortable, just like my mom did, emotionally distant from me. As crazy as it sounds, right? Emotional closeness for someone like me feels threatening. I feel vulnerable. I'm not used to it. I didn't learn how to be used to and develop that connection with my first core caregiver, who for me was my mother. Second pattern that was pervasive in my trauma bonding was that I would find myself directly and indirectly creating and being attracted to other partners who allowed or participated directly and indirectly in that co-creation of chaos. So for instance, my partner right now that I'm, now in we've evolved out of a trauma bond relationship with, when her and I met, her and I would ride those roller coasters of chaos together. So I might have had friends saying, why are you chasing this girl around town and you're chasing each other? You look crazy. Is this happy? But for me, that's what I knew, because my whole family evolved in that same We all rode that same emotional roller coaster. So I share that example because there's so many ways that we're carrying those models with us and then perpetuating and keeping ourselves locked in those cycles and keeping ourselves out of the fulfilling relationships that I think we want to be in.
So if I heard you correctly, you said your current partner, you had an initial trauma bond, but you transitioned out of?
Yes.
How did you do that?
So perfect. That leads me into the question so what do we do? First and foremost, we have to learn how to observe ourselves. We have to see these patterns, right? We have to watch and gain the awareness of what we're repeating. And the way we do that is by developing what I call self-observation. We learn how to be conscious, right? Because if we're not, 95% of our day, most of us are spending in that autopilot, in that subconscious. So to create a habit of consciousness, I do so through meditation, through building conscious moments in my day, through activating that more powerful part of my mind that actually can break those patterns. But that's the first practice that then allows me, so anyone listening, watch yourself, look back into your patterns of relationships, watch how you show up. This includes in friendships too. When I say relationship, this is friendships, this is work relationships, right? This is family relationships, and this is romantic relationships. Typically, we're engaging in the same patterns across the board. So watch yourself. So when my partner and we both kind of gradually, separately and together went through our own healing journey, if you will. And as part of that journey, we both created the habit of daily consciousness. And then both of our patterns were different, but we both practiced observing ourselves. How are we showing up in this relationship between the two of us? I then had my work to do to continue to do my healing and to show up differently in this relationship that I'm in now with her, that's evolving and changing. And she also did her work. And then in the co-creative space of our relationship, things started to shift and change. And then we were able to create the space to evolve our relationship together. And I'm happy you asked about that because I get this question a lot. Can a trauma bonded relationship evolve and change? And the answer is yes. As long as one or both parties are doing the work, incredible change, in my opinion, can and has in my relationship happened.
That's wonderful. I love that. And like I said, whole point of this, number one, is for education. And then number two, for empowerment and self-healing, which I know you are really big on. And also for everyone who's saying, please save this live. It will be in the story for 24 hours after this. So yes, the live will be saved for 24 hours after this. You can watch it and rewatch it. Forgot my thought. I'm sorry. I've seen that so many times. I just wanted to address it because a lot of people are asking. Okay. The attraction to what is not necessarily good for us. What I liked about your personalization was, and I've experienced this as well, where you are behaving in a certain way, where you're directly connecting with your parents or your primary caregiver, because that might have been a nanny or an orphanage or whoever. But you're connecting with your primary caregiver, and in the way that they showed you love, affection, attention, etc., even though that might have not been what you wanted, like you said, if that was inconsistent or if that was cold in any way or off-putting, if you couldn't depend on it, if it was up and down, or if you maybe even worse found yourself constantly lacking it, wanting it, needing it, and not really being satisfied by it. As an adult going into creating your own relationships and trying to create a happy life for yourself and a happy relationship for yourself, even though what you are professing is, I really want something that's deeply connected and something that, is very satisfying and very safe, and where I can depend on my partner, etc. At the same time, you're constantly attracting and building with people who do not make you feel that way.
Yeah, 100%.
My hope in this is that anybody listening to this would no longer guilt and shame and ridicule someone for, as you said, not seeing the red flags because you're blind to the red flags at that point.
Or themselves. Let me just add that too. We are often, not to say the most cliched thing, but it is true, our own worst critics. A lot of the shaming happens. Yes, I do think it does happen between friends and family members and all that. But I know a significant amount happens up here. A lot of us are carrying the shame of our relationships, past or present, whatever they might be, and we beat ourselves up. So please extend that, and I will extend that, to in here too, to showing yourself compassion. And that's why I speak about, how these, in my opinion, these conditioned patterns have been transmitted intergenerationally, right?
Totally
Meaning,
agree.
so far, so we don't have to be shameful about it. This is why I explain this. So now I don't have to own this. This isn't a deficit in me. I don't pick bad people. I'm not worthy of love and all of the other crazy stories that our subconscious, our inner critic tells ourselves. No, this is just the patterns that have been passed on, that we all now have the gift to break and to create a future that's different, not only in our relationships, but in now generations that'll continue to be here.
Could not agree more. And I agree with that. I'm really hard on myself too when I find myself in situations that I know better. Especially, I think what can be really challenging for me is when so for me, I had a father who, same thing, was in and out. So he was inconsistent. I did a lot of work when I was a teenager. And so I really kind of thought I was ahead of the game, and when I dated initially, I was doing pretty good, and had attracted a couple of relationships that were kind of good. And then the crazy part for me is, as I got older, that's when I started making more poor decisions. When I was younger, every time I saw a man who I felt like, if I felt like there was a man who was showing up in my father's energy, I was gone. I was out. I was like, I'm out of here. Nope, I know what this is. I'm leaving. But later on, it actually was when, I started having people show up in my life and who I did bond with, fall in love with, who were more in and out, more inconsistent. And so I want to agree with you in saying I was very hard on myself. I was very much like, come on, we know, come on, really? You know what I mean? Like, you don't know how to do this. And then on top of that, being a mental health professional.
I know.
So I agree with you. I think we really have to be gentle with ourselves. I think we really have to be kind with ourselves. I think we have to understand that, A, nobody's perfect. We're all human. But B, we're all in this trying to do our work, I would say. Trying to learn our lessons, you know what I mean? And to really pay attention to what everything is here to teach us. And no matter what, every person who comes into our life, there's a lesson. There's something there, you know what I mean? There's some work there to be done. And so I'm up for it. I'm up for the challenge. It can be painful sometimes, but I'm totally up for it.
Yeah, it's painful in a lot of ways, because this is, again, something that I think is really counterintuitive to most of us. Change is difficult. Even if we're moving in a logically positive direction, here's where that, right, the subconscious and that familiarity comes back in. We are pulled to stay in those same familiar ruts, if you will. And when we go out of those, it just brings up multiple levels of discomfort. In addition to, as we become conscious, I mean, for me at least as well, it's painful to witness some of these truths about ourselves, about, maybe our families, our parents, or the ways we are continuing to show up in our worlds, even, that aren't always serving us. There's so many layers of discomfort that come along this healing journey that's real.
That's something I'd like you to talk a little bit on. I find a lot of times, particularly with African Americans, but I think this is probably across the board, we have so much respect for our parents, and it's been like ingrained into us, that sometimes what happens is, when we're doing our own personal work, it's really challenging to tell the truth about the village we came from, because it feels like we're betraying our parents, and we love them, but the reality is, a lot of them didn't have the tools, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to love them and to know they did the best they can. And at the same time, they still didn't have what it was that you needed most in order to get you to where you were trying to go.
100%. And you said a really pivotal word in your beautiful, eloquent description right there, Danai, which was "and." We really need to be able to become flexible as human, to hold space for multiple truths at once. So in that scenario, my parents did the best they could, And maybe I'm very well aware that they loved me. And these were some areas, you know, that my unique personal needs did not get met as uniquely as I needed them. And I use those words in particular because we cannot expect, even so, most of our parents, especially in the older generations, my parents are in their 80s now, right? So I know generationally part of, you know, the messaging and the beliefs that they were raised around that got transmitted to how they parented and how they showed up for me, you know. So we can't, or I you know, find it hard to expect my parents to model things that they just simply don't do themselves. I mean, that's just, how would they? They're not taking care of themselves in this way, so they don't even know that they're missing out, right? So there's just like, some of this is an impossibility, you know. And I think when we build in the space for, and, you know, the more we know about our parents, some of us can know exactly, you know, what their past generations and how their childhoods were. So some of us are going to have the details, be able to fill in and understand these patterns, and some of us won't. But I think if we can just make space for, and this applies to many conversations, multiple truths at once. If I can even hold space for multiple people around me to hold multiple truths, then I can be really flexible. I don't have to be so threatened. So when we think about our parents, you know, just acknowledging that we can only model, and this goes for our own children too. And this is why I don't have children, but, you know, a lot of parents out there, they want to know how to parent better. And my response is always the same: parent yourself better. And then that's what you're modeling to your child. So understanding those limitations, having that empathy, you know, understanding why our parents were lacking in those ways, and they loved us, right? And it doesn't mean we're betraying them. And we can still make a choice to put up boundaries within our family systems if we need to. And I am someone who or who has no contact with my family, you know, who has separated myself. So that's another and too, because a lot of times when I speak about this, if I can understand my parents, you know, and where they come from, a lot of people, I think, think that I need to welcome in then to explain away all of their behaviors.
Talk about it.
That's not it at all. I can understand, you know, why my parents did what they did. I can maybe, you know, empathize. I can maybe even acknowledge that they loved me, and I still can choose to have some version of a boundary with them and within our relationship, which can even include no relationship. So, right? And I can have all of this exist at once. And I don't have to just show up to my family for a version of a relationship that doesn't work for me, even if I get why they're playing the part that they're playing.
You just went into another live that I'm planning for later this week with Dr. Nedra Webb on forgiveness, because I
love Nedra.
So awesome. I reposted her, and she was talking about what forgiveness doesn't mean. And so I was in the comments talking to people, and several people kind of basically felt like, because it's two different things. Either forgiveness means that you completely let the person off the hook, have no expectations of them, forget everything that happened, and there's no consequences, there's no boundaries, and you just allow full-on access. And I'm like, whoa, hey, man, hey, you know what I mean? That sounds like a petri dish for what do you call it? Just hurting me over and over and over again. And that is not what I am advocating, and that is not what I'm talking about. And I think it's really wonderful that you mentioned boundaries, and that you mentioned truths that can exist simultaneously, you know, juxtaposed amongst each other. And just to go back to where I started from, because I thought one point to make about the parental units is what I really want to communicate to anyone listening is, please don't allow your love or your respect for your parentals to keep you from exploring and asking the deep questions about what your real experience was. Because I think I did that early on. There's so much journaling and artwork and shows, plays and comedy shows and stand-up and all these different things that I would write as a young creative, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, and would never release anything because of who would be implicated in my story. Who in my village would not be shown in their best light. And I always felt a responsibility to protect the reputations of the people around me But as a result of that, it hindered how much I was able to explore and I
Yeah.
was able to express.
Yeah, 100%. And some of us are even given that direct messaging. I mean, I've heard family cultures where children or the family system itself is directly instructed that this doesn't leave the house, that you actually don't talk about these things, and that it does mean, something quite negative, if you do talk about those things. And I think that's an important part too. Something else I want to build on and also offer, to give up an expectation that the person with whom, so I 100% validate your own reality, but I highly suggest you don't hold too strong onto an expectation that you're going to get your parent or caregiver to see your reality.
Agreed.
Because that's really challenging, and we do ourselves a disservice and we set ourselves up to be really disappointed when that doesn't happen. And not all of the time is that going to happen. The last conversation I had with my family, I still hold an alternate reality than all of the rest of my family members. And I presented them mine. It's been refuted. They don't care to choose to acknowledge it. And I've made peace that I validate myself in that reality. And that also applies to life. Because I say that because I know a lot of people, we do the healing, we see clear, we validate our own reality. And now I go back to mom, dad, or whomever, and I want them to see it my way. And not all the time are we given that acknowledgement.
I so love you for saying that, because I do think what can happen, and it can be jarring when we're doing our own work, particularly when we're away from the home. I'm one of those too. I was raised in Seattle, and then I went to Howard, so I'm in DC for college, and now I'm in LA. And every time you go home, be it for a holiday or for a birthday or for a celebration or whatever, the reality that you've been creating around yourself, because you have been doing your work, is always challenged by the village in some way, shape, or form, right? And it can be very, very jarring when you're like, oh, wait, hold on. And one of the things I heard that I think is also very interesting that some of, the people who are watching tonight might be dealing with is when your village makes their way the only way. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I'm a little triggered right now. I'm having a memory of being back home after leaving home in college and getting into a physical fight with my mother. And I've never done that before. And the physical fight was because of me feeling like all of you people are crazy. And then going home, going off and being granted an education, etc., dealing with my own stuff, actually coming into a ton of circles where I was affirmed with what it was that I was thinking and with the crazy and with my own experiences, etc. And then coming back into the crazy where nothing had changed because they hadn't gone away. And I just could not take it. And I was so triggered that, and I don't want anybody thinking I beat my mom up or anything like that. It wasn't like that. Before we could even get there, my aunt got in between everything. But what I'm trying to say is my triggers were so deep rooted because of what I call the Shakespeare that was going on and the dance that my household would do. And my absolute, I can't tolerate this anymore. Like, only the truth will do. And I literally cannot even be a part of this because it's insanity what you guys do, and everybody's pretending that they don't know what's going on, and I'm the only person going, does anybody see this but me? And you all are calling me crazy. And so, you know what I mean? It was that type of so I know I'm going into my own stuff, but I'm just saying re-entry can be very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that it happens a lot that way. And I'm not here suggesting that you don't attempt to share or you don't share your reality with whoever it is, your family, members or whoever. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from doing that, because a lot of healing can happen. Some caregivers and families and parents, and maybe not at the initial moment of hearing this new reality. Right. Sometimes, something gets touched, in the listener, and an emotion happens, and then we don't hear it. And then as oftentimes a day or two goes by and it percolates up again, a conversation could be opened at a later time, so
which
great feeling.
Which ended up, I'd like to, since I made her sound like that, let me say later on, 10 years later. there was a conversation that she could hear, but you're absolutely right. At that time, she couldn't, and I think I didn't get to the point. The point of me sharing that was just to reaffirm what you were saying about don't expect for your unit to always be ready to hear what it is that you have to share with them, because you have been through a process that they haven't been through. And it doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean that they'll never change.
Yeah, right.
But again, for me, what I'm trying to share is just to be aware of what could hinder your process of continuing your healing journey, right? What could possibly hinder that? And what could possibly hinder that is if you go back in, you re-enter, and they're still like, nope, nope, that's not us. And you're like, oh, okay. That doesn't necessarily have to, shift you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then your choices are, can I find a way or modify showing up for this relationship in the interim, which might be for the foreseeable future, that they stand by this note, right? Do I need to modify maybe the way I show up? Maybe I can just continue to show up in this way, just acknowledging that they're just not going to acknowledge my reality. Right. Or is it that problematic that I cannot show up for this relationship until things change? And that's an individual question. Not everyone, we have to go through our own process. But I say that because another option is, do I show up in every week that I see this person? I try to hammer this conversation down. Probably path C is not the most helpful path, but that's what a lot of us attempt, right? I'm not going to stop. Another suggestion, when emotions get touched in the speaker and in the listener, right? Really great time to shut the conversation down for another time. Yes. Because I assure you that anytime one or both parties have become emotional, neither one is going to have their point heard, or neither one is going to be receptive toward that resolution that we're looking for. And a lot of times around these conversations, feelings do get touched, right? So that's not running out of the room. That's maybe just like, listen, maybe now is not the best time to finish this conversation. Maybe we'll put a pin in it until we're both a bit calmer tomorrow, next week, some other time.
Absolutely. I want to go through, because your post is so amazing, I want to go through the signs that you posted of what a trauma bond is. All right, so we've got 8 of them here. The first is incessant, obsessive focus on another person with fear of abandonment. So these are the signs that you will have if you are in a relationship with someone that is a trauma bond that you guys can identify it with. Number 2, lack of boundaries, space, and clear autonomy. Number 3, emotionally addictive cycles of being abandoned or rejected and then chosen again. So if you got that thing going on where they abandon you, they reject you, and then they choose you again, and you're like, oh, yay, I want this, that's another sign. That was number 3. Number 4, fear of the person reacting, which creates secrecy on your part and hidden behaviors. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times truth and honesty doesn't happen in a relationship because of a concern about the other person and their reaction. So what this happens, again, just tying this all together so you understand, right? If as a child, I have learned that to maintain love of, say, my mom, for me, I learned how to show up, to not ruffle mom's feathers. I know how to make mom happy and not make mom sad. I'm really kind of simplifying this. So that happens. I learned how to show up for others in relationships, right? I keep showing up for others in relationships. So essentially what I've learned is how someone else feels is more important than how I feel. Because for me, when my mom was happy, she was as connected with me as she could be. When my mom was angry, I should add this because this is the part that really kind of is amplified here. When she's mad at me, or when I show up and I'm bad, my mom withdraws. She ices, as I call it. So I learned to navigate how someone else is feeling about me. So how this could translate, because I lived a little version of this. I had a fear of speaking my truth in relationships, whether or not that was what I wanted to do or not do, if I even knew what I wanted to do or not do. I was so afraid of making someone else upset. So I was fearful that my truth would cause an emotion in someone else. So I used to avoid sharing a lot of truths. I just wouldn't speak on topics, or I wouldn't say anything. And this happens a lot in relationships. So if you are someone who's always monitoring someone else's reaction to you, or what you're saying, or what you're thinking, or what you believe, then you might want to explore within yourself, how honest are you able to be with that person? Because chances are you're not going to be honest. You're going to tell them what you think they want to hear to avoid whatever repercussion you've either lived or imagine you'd live if you speak your honest truth.
I think it's fabulous. I know it happens regularly. I have clients who
Yes.
Do it all the time. And it's very interesting because I would hear clients say, I recently found this out. I've noticed I was like analyzing a bunch, but I used to hear one partner usually would say, oh, I can't talk to her, or oh, I can't talk to him. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I feel like there are things that I can't share, etc. And initially, I thought that was single. But what I started noticing is both partners. Now I know if one partner is feeling that, the other one is feeling that as well.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
It's fascinating. Yeah. It becomes a dynamic in the relationship then itself, in a sense. It's
interesting to me because they'll notice, well, I feel like I can't share certain things, but they seem to be unaware that their partner feels the same way about them.
Yes. Yeah. And chances, some of this too is connected. Some of us were modeled relationships where directly or indirectly things weren't said. I came from a household where nothing was said. No emotions were talked about except stress. Remember, that's the only thing we could talk about. The latest thing that stressed us out. Not what made us sad, not what made us mad, right? So things weren't talked about. Some of us are directly told or instructed what is okay to talk about and what isn't. You'll have some even families that'll say, oh no, we don't talk about that in families, or you never share this with your husband or your wife, or you don't, right? Some of us are given that level of messaging around what's talked about. Some of it is just about the emotional climate that was either welcomed or not. I came from a family that had no emotional climate that was really welcomed outside of stress, right? So a lot of this then becomes what we tell ourselves is okay or not okay. And that also informs what I'm going to share with the partner as well.
Totally agree. Have a lot of people who come from backgrounds or families where sadness in particular.
Yes.
There is no sadness. What are you talking about? We don't deal with that. You calm that down, you go someplace else.
Yes.
But that is just an emotion that's not allowed. It's very interesting because I think it makes people uncomfortable. Okay, continuing with your list. Number 5, intense focus on sexual connection over authentic connection or communication. I see this all the time, where a sexual connection is magnified to such an extent that it's almost like nothing else is there, or that's all that is focused on in terms of what's addressed and what's important, etc. And then you end up with all these other issues that are underlying that aren't being addressed, etc. Because this is so good that is just, well, this is bothering me, but I'm going to toss that aside, or I'm not going to deal with it, or I'm going to stuff it because, the sex is so good.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so something I would want to explore with myself is what meaning is being assigned to sex being good or not good in a relationship. Outside, again, this is another area where you and I were speaking about earlier, where there are physiological changes and things that happen when we're physically intimate and, with another human. That is intoxicating physiologically. Right. Outside of that, right? There's what we're doing, and this is often, again, subconscious, outside of our awareness, unless we practice being consciously aware, right? This is how like I was saying earlier, observe. Look at the meaning. What we're doing unconsciously or subconsciously more often than not is we're assigning a meaning to much of our life. So I would want to know, for these people who find themselves putting sex up on the pedestal or physical connection of any sort up on this pedestal, well, why? What meaning does that have for you, about you? A lot of, especially with, women and our bodies, maybe men too. What does that mean about you? What does it mean? What does it mean about you, your physical body, your relationship? Just what does it mean? And you're going to come up then with a possible meaning that you've assigned that did prioritize sex for you. So I would want to explore those type of things. And the reality of it is, you interestingly, you used the word earlier, you said bond. And I did a post, I think it was like last week now, where I contrasted this idea of bonding, and I kind of married the concept of bond with familiarity that we're talking about, with this idea that a lot of us are gravitating toward those familial, if you will, bonds. That's what I'm calling a bond. Contrasting that or comparing that to relationship. A relationship, right, is where that depth. So outside of just the sex aspect, which is an aspect of relationships, what about the person? the spirit, the emotion beneath of it, the relationship, the full of it. So that's something else that I think comes to mind when I think of the prioritization of sex. That's one component. It's an important component. We all, I think, value it differently. That's another, question. Are you in alignment? Is that something that is important to you? How important to you is that in the relationship? Someone might say, yeah, it is pretty high on my priority list, but it can't be everything.
Right.
If you're that someone who the rest of the relationship is absent or terrible, that's not going to sustain you. So where is the relationship? Where is the depth?
I love everything you said about the meaning you attach. That's a really good question to ask. Number 6, denying or hiding harmful behavior that might be alarming to those around you. So harmful behavior, meaning addictions or something like cutting. I don't know if cutting is an addiction, or harmful behavior. Give us a couple examples of harmful behavior. Like what would...
It can be it can be harmful of the self, all the ways that we self-harm, like you're saying, the more physical ways, the substance ways, I check out. I'm even harmful, I criticize myself nonstop. So we have harm of the self. Sometimes we're hiding harmful things that are happening within our relationship, and again, it's this kind of, these things are what I know. I think there's just a lot of, relationships are challenging. Relationships are really the terrain of our emotions.
Yeah.
And what we need to think about when we think of emotion is the emotion itself, but more importantly, it's how we've learned to deal with the emotions. And that's where this concept of harm and self-harm, because again, a lot of us were raised with caregivers who don't know how to navigate their emotions because they were never taught.
Very true. I can't wait to see what you're going to write on navigating emotions, because that right there, that's the piece.
That's hard. Mm-hmm.
Number 7, a strong desire to be comforted by the person who's causing severe emotional harm. If that ain't the root of this thing right now, the idea that someone could be harming you emotionally via inconsistency, via cheating, via toxic language with you, via abusive behaviors, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, financially, whatever the abuse is, via just not loving you the way that you need to, but you still have a craving to be bonded to the person who is harming you. Holler at me, Nicole. Come on. I'm sorry, go ahead.
This comes from childhood. When we're in that dependent state, we are in those of us who have experienced any form of abuse, neglect, unmet need. Now, I'm someone who believes in a more expansive version of trauma than big T. So I'm throwing the instances of, not feeling seen, not feeling heard, not feeling, authentically valued as a self, not having boundaries in our relationships and feeling respected and set, right? All of this, right? So that happens, right, in our childhood. That's kind of where it starts. That's what we become used to, and that we're dependent, so we have no choice but to continue to have our needs met. And that dependency is really key here when we think about this. I want love from this person who's hurting me, because we need love. Because what love is survival at that young age. So we find ourselves in the most contradicting, complicated situation when the person that we need and that we desperately want to love us is also the person that's hurting us. And then that's that conflict that we carry into adulthood. Yes, we've matured and we're in a bigger body now. We've had different relationship experiences, but we've kind of fused those two really opposing things. I'm scared of you. I'm fearful. You hurt me. And I love you. I need you. And then that's what we replicate when we have that kind of push-pull, or when we find ourselves continually going back to someone who has hurt us in whatever way.
That's my favorite one. And the last one, number 8, is a feeling of chronic self-doubt that you might be going crazy, denying your own reality. People were talking about gaslighting before. I think this is more along the lines of gaslighting, or even just, like you said, self-doubt, not really having the confidence to believe that what it is that you're experiencing is either wrong, or that it's off, or that you're right, if you will. And I think a lot of that, again, if you come from parentals or I'm trying to find all my other words right now, but for the people in your village who were raising you, if you were not affirmed, as you said, and I'm glad that you keep going from the extreme down to just neglect, or someone, ignoring you, or someone not giving you the attention you need, or someone not affirming the things that are your experiences. If you're mommy, this is what happened to me, and it's no, it didn't. Anything, you know what I mean? Anything like that. You're absolutely right. That it can be very problematic for you to self-identify in any way and feel confident that your experience is valid, that it's actually happening to you, that you're remembering correctly, etc. All of that can be undermined psychologically by your village.
100%. I think it's an important journey, because while sometimes some of us need that outsider perspective or vantage point to have that contrast, right? I mean, when we're children and we're like just in our village, it really takes to school age to look around and see other kids, and maybe then see how other kids found, right? We don't know any different because we're just living in our experience. And then obviously as our circles expand. So I say that to say, some of us, right, will need to have those conversations as part of our healing with someone else. We'll need to bounce our reality off of.
There we go. Okay. We're about to see how this works, but I am on my phone now, and instead of the sound is great. Okay, good. It's saying that the connection is horrible. It just said it was paused due to a poor connection. Apologies. So I'm on my phone now. I normally do this from an iPad. And I have a feeling Nicole's phone died, because after the first time it went down, we were talking back and forth, but she hasn't spoken again or responded again. So I think her phone died. So I just wanted to give you guys an explanation kind of what just happened. Instagram gives you 1 hour to go live. And after that hour is over, it gives you a 2-minute countdown to let you know, that the hour is going to be over, and to let you know to wrap up your live. So it didn't give me that. Sometimes when either your technology gets hot, or if it's not working very well, which right now the connections are not working, and I think a lot of people are on Instagram and it might be having technical difficulties. Point is, it didn't give us the countdown. So when we tried to come back on, which you guys just saw, it looked like Nicole's phone, I think, died, probably because we had been on for an hour, so she might not have realized to charge it for that long. So I'm saying that because she hasn't come back. So my assumption is it's a technology issue. So I just kind of wanted to wrap it out properly for you guys and say thank you all for tuning in. Let you know that hour is saved in the story if you want to watch it. We just spoke on trauma bonds with the holistic psychologist, who's Nicole LaPera, and the post that we were speaking out of is on my page right now. It's one she did on trauma bonds, so you can see it. It's like the last post that's up. And if you want to go to her page, she is the holistic psychologist.